welcome to the Good Stories Podcast. My name is Jody, here with Steven, and I have a cool announcement today that this is our podcast birthday.
Hey, happy birthday, Good Stories Podcast.
Today we are officially a year old, or really by the time this drops, we'll be more than a year old. So happy podcast birthday, brother.
Happy birthday, sister.
So I think, I like numbers. So I just pulled a few together that I'm going to tell you because I think it's fun. So since February 22nd, 2025, we have recorded 65 episodes. They're not all out, but this is our 65th. We have released 25 shorts. Those are on our Patreon. 4 guest interviews. I listed out our top 3 episodes, and these are on Apple and Spotify. So the top one, I think still Harriet.
Harriet's got to be Harriet.
Number 12 episode, All Creatures Great and Small, by far our biggest episode. And I think it's because it's so popular. There's the show out, and they're just wonderful stories. So that's number 1. Number 2, Leaf by Niggle.
I love Leaf by Niggle. That's one of my very favorites.
I think part of why that one's big is it was very early on. It's like our 3rd episode.
Yeah.
So people who just listen to a few, that one's in there. But also, our number 3, very close behind, is Fantasties.
Oh, that makes me proud.
Which is the first one from this season. So it's not brand new. People starting at the beginning would have had to go find it. And I just listened to part of that one again. I love it.
That one was
good.
One we were so intimidated to do, or at least I was.
Still
I
am.
was very nervous about approaching that one, but I'm so glad we did it because I had a ton of fun with it. And I've listened to that a couple times since we've released it because I love Fantasties.
I mean, that's a pretty good lineup. We have Harriet and a Tolkien and a George MacDonald in the top 3. Like, heck yeah.
Pretty good.
It's funny. YouTube, the numbers count differently, which irks me, but I look at them separately. YouTube is separate. The number 1 on YouTube is The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry.
Really?
Yes.
I loved that one too.
So it actually works out when we only pick stories that we like, because then I like them.
That's right.
By definition.
That one definitely made me cry, but many of these have made me cry. So,
and I do love Harold, yes. So we have legitimately a few hundreds of new followers this year, and dozens of listeners who've reached out, and we now count as new friends. So really just feeling grateful overall. It's been a joy so far. And I think for me, the bar was, I hope someone other than just our mom listened. And we have achieved success.
Yes.
But thank you, Mom, for listening. We do appreciate it.
That too. Totally.
So thank you to Steven, because, you do the bulk of remembering things. Good job. And then to David, the EP, who's not here today, but he helped so much on the technology and encouragement side of things. So I just think it's really cool we're at a year. Good job.
That is really cool. It's interesting. My daughter this morning asked me, my kids always ask, well, what story are you doing next? And then she asked me today whether I still liked doing it. And I was delighted to smile and say, yes, I do still like doing it. And I'm looking forward very much to talking about this one today.
It is fun. So if you're ever invited to come to an interview with us, you should say yes, because it's way more fun than you think it might be. Every time. If you do want to send us a happy birthday, I'm just going to use it as a plug. You can email us at goodstoriespodcast@gmail.com. We do read every message that comes in, and I always just like to hear from people. So putting it out there. We actually got a review a while back from someone, they named themselves. It's SR Now. I don't know if that's a real name or not, but I read that review on days when I'm like, should we still do this? It is so highly encouraging to me. And whoever you are, you have a way with words. I would love it if you email us so we know your name for real. Thank you. Anything to add?
Only that I agree with that. The people who have taken the time to write out reviews have really just been a gift to me. They have been so encouraging. And so thank you for doing that. We do read those. I get excited every time there's a new one. Obviously, I prefer it if they're nice. So far, they've all been nice. So thank you very much for those.
Yes. Please, only nice ones.
Yeah, I don't have thick enough skin to handle mean ones. So,
no, we're pretty weak in that way. I don't want to skip our top 5 new download locations this week. So hello out there to anyone listening from Ely, Nevada, Indianapolis, Indiana, Denver, Colorado, Somerville, Massachusetts, and Coppell, Texas. Thanks for listening. All right, today's episode is part 2 of the Younger Edda by Snorri Sturluson. So continuing the stories of the Norse gods. Last time we talked through, in essence, part 1 of the Edda called the Gylfaginning, or the tricking of Gylf. So if you haven't listened to that yet, I'd highly recommend doing so before listening to this episode, because today follows the part 2 called something like, I'm going to try, the Skáldskaparmál.
I love it. I think that's perfect.
Yes, which means to the effect of speech of the poets, or the language of poetry.
Should we apologize to the Norse again? I did
do.
last episode, but I'm going to throw myself at these words with great enthusiasm. So I hope you take that as the homage that it is, and I apologize for how poor the pronunciation will be.
Agreed. It's just with enthusiasm that we are doing so, not with any kind of expertise on how to actually pronounce things. I'm so sorry. But this one continues the really layered stories of Nordic myth. It includes more stories of awesome characters like One-Eyed Odin, the hammer god Thor, and the father of monsters, Loki. I picked one of each of their names. And specifically, this one has a great but bloody story about the creation of poetry, how it was made, then taken, then stolen, and then finally shared and passed down across generations. So let's get into it. Brother, over to you.
Yeah, some of these are some of my favorite stories from the Norse world. I really enjoyed the ones from last week, but last week was a lot of setting the table. It was a lot of describing the cosmos, describing creation, getting to know the gods, getting to know the anti-gods or the giants. It was a lot of getting set in that world. And now that we have all that information, now we can hop into the actual stories themselves. And so many of these are short, many of them are quick and punchy, but they are a ton of fun. And whereas the last one was all about this guy that went to, Gylf, right, went to Asgard, the home of the gods, to ask questions and to gain knowledge. This one starts in a similar way, where somebody goes to the home of the gods to gain knowledge. But in this one, there's more of a reciprocal interaction, and he eventually invites them to his home too. And so this one, we get out of Asgard and a little bit more into the world. And so, as Jody said, this one is the Skáldskaparmál. Now, I don't know what that means, but it does include skald at the beginning of it. And one of the big reasons this entire portion of the work was done was to try and give skalds, poets, the understanding to enjoy what had been written before and the tools to continue to write in this way. And so this part of it in my book is also subtitled Bragi's Talk. And Bragi, as we learned last week, is the Norse god of poetry. And he is going to have a lot to say as we progress through this story.
I would like to point out that poetry now, I think how a lot of people think of poetry, certainly not all, but it sounds flowery, right? And about love and romance and fluffy things. This poetry is inseparable from the names of the gods, that hammer god Thor, the one-eyed Odin. Those are components intrinsic to what they mean by poetry. It's how they speak about their beliefs and their faith and the characters of their foundational stories. So I think poetry in this sense is so much broader than so many of us think of poetry, at least me.
That is such a great point, because I think most of us these days, if we're asked to define poetry, well, on the simplest level, many of us would just say rhyme, because that has been the most common way we do poetry now. If it doesn't rhyme, how can it be poetry? But then the other example that often gets said for people who are, a step deeper is, well, poetry doesn't have to rhyme. It's all about the beauty of the language, and that the beauty of the language is what makes something poetry. And I think that's all part of it. I mean, the beauty of the language is certainly part of this, but I think the other thing that makes this poetry is that blend of wisdom. So there's wisdom and beauty and things like rhyme, although they don't tend to use rhyme as much in this form of poetry. But like rhyme, they use architecture of the language to make it flow, to make it sound appealing. And so, yeah, I do think it's broader than the way I normally think of poetry.
And it's not just pretty words. It's not just beautiful words. There's depth of words, because so much of what he describes as poetry at the end of this Skáldskaparmál is just lists of words you can use. It's almost like a thesaurus for poetry of adding richness and depth to whatever you're describing. So I just want to point that out before we get going.
Well, and maybe that is the best way to begin this, is to define or come up with the concept of a kenning. Because kennings are something we've talked about in the past. We talked about them last week. We talked about them on the Beowulf episode. But they really are the foundation of this sequence. Because for each of these stories, it usually starts with a question. Why is such and such called such and such? And then there's the story to explain the word or the term. So, Jody, what is a kenning?
I didn't write down a definition, but in essence, it's a metaphor, a descriptor for something, but it's based on a story. It's based on something they've done, something they've owned, something that's happened. So many of these kennings that he describes and lists later that we'll get into, he's just telling the stories that drive them. So why is Odin one-eyed Odin? Why could we call him one-eyed and people would know what that means? Why could we call him all-father? It's from these kenning. Those, by definition, are the kennings that come from these stories.
Yeah, and you can just feel the love of riddle, the love of kind of deeper knowledge, the love of cleverness in this poetry. This is very specifically the prose Edda, so it's not poetry. But again, that love of riddling. Remember, the whole thing with the Fooling of Gylf was this back and forth, this riddling, this questioning for knowledge and understanding these phrases and what's behind them. And that is embedded in the way the stories are told, and it's certainly embedded in the poetry.
Yeah. Did you write down a definition for kenning?
I didn't. I would have described it similar. I love the idea of it's a word metaphor that replaces something else. Well, it would be, for example, if in a book I was talking about a country and I referred to the country not as the United States of America, but as the land of Purple Mountain's majesty, right? If you didn't know the reference to that, you wouldn't know I was talking about America.
Yeah. Where?
Yeah. Or this gets done sometimes in Latin writings where they talk about the 7 hills. So if you know that Rome was built on 7 hills and that was a big part of the culture, you know, oh, we're talking about Rome. But it's describing very specifically what you're talking about, but it's using a term to do it that you have to understand something behind the term in order for it to be helpful. And those are very, very simple ones. They get much more complex.
It's true.
I mean, there's a couple that I remember from the first time I read through this, the idea of like, what's the whale's road? They talk about the whale's road. Well, that's the ocean, right? It's water. And then there's some that get far more specific and far more complex.
Winter is snake's death.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Makes me like winter even more.
I knew it would.
Yeah.
Anyway, it starts, though, describing where poetry even came from before it gets to the kennings described. So let's get into the story.
Yeah, let's get into these stories. So, and the overarching skeleton of this is a man named Ægir. So Ægir is a traveler, and he journeys to Asgard in order to attain wisdom.
Does yours say he's a sea giant?
No. Mine says a man by name Ægir or Heler, who dwelt on the island called Heler's Isle, was well skilled in the black art. He made a journey to Asgard. Does yours say he's a sea giant?
Mine doesn't, but it popped up in a couple essays I read that it says he's a sea giant. Ægir travels to Asgard. I'm like, well, that's cool.
That is cool. But as we talked about last week, and since this is part 2, we are going to be using some terminology that we defined last week, and we're kind of assuming that you know what we mean. When we talk about the giants, whether they're the frost giants or the sea giants, we're talking about a word in Norse that are the Jotun. Jotun, or in the plural, Jotnar. And so what these are basically the opponents of the gods. But as we talked about last time, we don't mean giant in the sense that they're just huge. In many cases, they get mistaken for the gods. They have very similar powers, very similar appearance. The gods of the Norse will marry sometimes the giants and certainly have these other relations with them. And so when we say Ægir is a sea giant, that's how he can come in and hang out with the gods and not immediately be like, hey, you're our enemy, because he may not be their enemy. And he doesn't seem to be here, actually, because he gets invited to the feast. And in the mead hall, where it says the mead was very strong and they drank deep, he got to sit next to Bragi. And Bragi, as we said, is the god of poetry. And then, it hops into the stories.
And like we mentioned last time, Stephen and I have different translations, okay? Different copies of this book. So his actually goes in an entirely different order. And truly, there's so many pieces to this. A lot of it's very different. So this is how mine begins, my everyman copy of this that I like very much.
So the origin of poetry is wonderful because it actually goes back to a conflict. It goes back to a war. There was a war between the Æsir and the Vans, or the Æsir and the Vanir. So these are the two families of gods that end up having some joining. We learned the last time that Njord is one of the Vanir gods, and his two children, Freya and Frey, are so important in Norse mythology. But they began at war before that joining together. And so when they made peace, they decided they need to do something to recognize and establish that peace. And so, as we would all think of doing, they spit into a cauldron.
Gross.
This was the mark of peace. They joined their saliva in a cauldron, but they wanted this to last. So out of this joined spit of the two races of gods, this thing from their mouths, they formed a man named Kvasir. And so Kvasir was made out of the spit of the gods, and he is wisdom personified. He is so wise that he knows all the answers to all questions. This seems like a great thing, but it turns out he was actually kind of annoying. There are dwarves, and again, there's names for all these. You don't have to remember the names, but the dwarves that get listed are, see if I can pronounce these, Fjalar and Galar. They get annoyed by how smart he is, how he always just seems to know the answer. And so they kill him. They literally kill him, and they store his blood in these 3 great vats. But then they mix it with honey, and here we have the mead of poetry. And so anybody who drinks this combination of Kvasir's blood and honey becomes a poet or a skald. And they are the ones who own this now.
And it says, the dwarves told the Æsir, the gods, that Kvasir had suffocated in intelligence because there was no one there educated enough to be able to ask him questions.
Sometimes there's a problem being a know-it-all. The dwarves may come and kill you. But now they have this incredible treasure. But the dwarves in Norse mythology are often up to no good. And so they end up actually getting in this whole tangle with a giant. And there's a story about the ocean, and they end up leading to this giant's death. And his son, Suttung, comes back to try and take vengeance upon them. And in order to basically save their lives, they say, no, rather than us dying, we will give you the mead of poetry. And so now we have this giant, this anti-god, who is now the owner of these vats of poetry. And he hoards them and keeps them to himself. And this is actually where the story really starts, where the gods set in. And this is the first story we have told yet of Odin actually doing something kind of cool. Odin steps out into Suttung's land, but he knows that he can't just do it with Suttung, so he actually goes to Suttung's brother, Bragi. And he is the one that Odin kind of ingratiates himself with. But he does it in a way that is very characteristic of Odin. Remember, Odin is a god of war. He is a trickster in his own right. He is the god of the slain in so many ways, particularly the slain in battle. And when Odin shows up, life isn't usually better for the people he encounters. It usually gets worse in some way. And this is a good example. Odin is walking down the road in disguise when he comes across 9 of the laborers of Bragi, the brother of this anti-god. They are chopping grain in the fields with their whetstones. And he says, hey, I will sharpen your whetstones for you if you would like me to. Well, they jump at this, and he sharpens their whetstones, and they have never had blades this sharp. These are comically sharp. It is just amazing what these scythes can now do.
I was just wondering if you'd say the word.
I did. Is that right or wrong?
Pretty close.
Okay, pretty close. Scythes?
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Scythes? This is a recurring thing. It's all right. Anyways, these tools of agriculture that the men are using are sharper and better than they've ever been. And so they ask Odin, his disguised form, can we buy that whetstone from you? And he says, no, I'm not going to sell it, but I will throw it up in the air, and whoever gets it can keep it. Well, he throws it up in the air, and all these men with very sharpened blades start swinging them around, and they kill each other, till eventually there are no laborers left, and the whetstone falls to the ground.
I will say there's a lot of killing in this one.
Mm-hmm.
Or not in this, in the whole Skáldskaparmál. There's a lot of killing, a lot of bloodshed.
Yeah.
Yes, these slaves, these laborers take each other out, and it's just Odin left.
Yeah. So he keeps walking down the road to, the main farm, and Bragi, the guy who runs the farm, is really annoyed, not at Odin, but because now who is going to work for him? He doesn't have laborers anymore. He's not really upset that they're dead, just that he doesn't have manpower. Well, Odin says, no problem. I will work for you. I will work with you for this entire summer. But what I ask back is I want a drink from your brother's cauldron of mead. Right? He has the 3 big vats of mead. I want a drink from that. And Bragi says, yeah, sure. I'm sorry, Baugi. No R.
Baugi. This is a giant. This is the brother of the giant who owns the mead.
So this brother of the giant with the mead takes him up on it and says, yeah, we can do that. And so Odin works for him for a whole summer. He does a great job. And at the end of it, they decide, okay, now we're going to go ask for the mead. Well, Suttung, the giant who has the mead, is not interested in sharing. He says no flat out. And so now Odin knows he has to move into deception. And Baugi seems willing to help with this. He's on board. And so Odin pulls out an awl. And by awl, I mean a drilling tool. And he hands it to Baugi and says, all right, drill through the wall so we can get to the mead on the other side. And Baugi starts to drill and he says, I'm done. I've made it. But Odin's not one to be tricked. And he says, really? Blow in the hole. And so Baugi blows into the hole he just drilled with the awl, and it comes back and chips fly in his face. So Odin knows he hasn't actually completed it. He says, nope, keep going. Do it the whole way. And again, he has him blow in the hole, and the chips go all the way through the hole. So Odin knows he can get in there now. So he transforms himself into a serpent, and he slides through the hole. Meanwhile, Baugi tries to kill him with the awl as he's escaping from him, but Odin is too fast, and he is able to sneak into the room where these vats of mead are present. But he's not alone in there. The giant has a daughter, and it is her job to guard these vats of mead. But this is Odin, and he can seduce anyone he wants, and so she tells him, I will give you 1 drink of the mead for every night you spend with me. So he spends 3 nights with this woman, this giant, and afterwards he takes 3 drinks. Conveniently, there are 3 vats, and with each drink, he is able to consume each of the vats. So now all the mead of poetry is within Odin. Odin then transforms to an eagle, and he starts flying back to Asgard because he has what he wants. Well, the giant Suttung realizes what's going on. He sees this eagle flying away, and he himself takes the form of an eagle, and he chases Odin down. He goes after him to try and catch him. And as Odin is flying, he's pushing so hard, he's working so hard. And this is one of those where it depends how it's translated in your version, but it's hilarious. One of the things we mentioned last week was there's a fair amount of toilet humor in these stories. Odin urinates some of this mead out into the world where anybody can get a hold of it.
Does yours use the word urinate?
I can't.
Mine says he sent some of the mead out backwards.
Okay.
and this was disregarded.
I have read several translations of this, and each one has its own particular euphemism. So, but he pees it out is what's going on here. And that goes out into the world where anyone can access it. But then he finally gets to the shining walls of Asgard. He gets across. They're able to stop the other giant from getting through. And Odin is able to, he spits it out into the vats of the gods. And so now Odin is the master of the mead of poetry. But there is all that stuff he let go before he got across the walls. And this is why bad poetry is so common, because anybody can handle that. Anybody has access to that. But the good stuff, you have to go to Odin for that.
Mine calls the excess rhymester share, the rhyming, the simple, the basic poetry. But out of this story where Odin goes and steals what was rightfully taken from this giant, all these Kennings come. And so here, the guy telling the story says, that is why we call poetry sometimes Kvasir's blood. That was the intelligent guy, where it came from, the insufferably intelligent guy.
Right. So annoying.
Sometimes people call it dwarf's drink, or there's one is about Odin. We call it Odin's booty and find, his drink and his gift, and the Aesir's drink. All of those are Kennings. They're ways to refer to this wonderful poetry that talks about their history and the wisdom of their past. Odin's booty and find. It would mean the same thing. I love that.
Yeah. And this is a great example of how this work goes, because there's a question that comes up or a story that gets told. And then out of it, the guy then says, and here's how it's used in poetry. This is how these stories can be used to generate Kennings. And so with that, I think we're just going to get to hop through a whole bunch more stories. The next one in my translation is Idun and her apples. So this is another story that involves the gods, and actually a bunch of them. And this story, as we'll find, leads into other stories. That's another thing I love about these, is this web where one story will lead itself into another. So let's start with this one. We have Odin, we have Loki, and we have the god Honir, who are traveling together, and they are hungry. So they're out in the world. This is not in Asgard. This is not in the home of the gods. They are traveling about the world, and they are hungry, but no problem. They find an ox, they kill an ox, and they begin to cook it. The problem is this ox just won't boil. No matter what they do, they can't get it to boil, no matter how much fire they apply to it. Well, there's an eagle nearby. This eagle is called Thrasse. And Thrasse offers to get the water to boil, but he has a caveat. He's got a condition. He requests an exchange of food. He is going to reach in once this is boiled, and he is going to grab food for his portion and share. The gods agree to this. The water boils immediately, and Thrasse reaches in to grab his share, but he grabs basically the whole thing. I mean, he gets a huge chunk of this ox, and Loki is not okay with this, and so Loki goes to attack him. He strikes the eagle with a stick. It becomes obvious immediately that this is no ordinary eagle. This is one of the anti-gods. This is a giant. And the stick, through magic, binds to the eagle, and Loki is bound to the stick, and the eagle starts to fly away. And so Loki is getting dragged through the rocks and the trees and the ground. He is getting pummeled as he's being dragged and towed by this eagle. And eventually, Loki strikes a deal with the eagle that Thrasse will let him go if Loki promises to bring him Idun and her apples. And if we remember, Idun is one of the gods. She's actually the wife of Bragi, but her apples are what keep the gods young. So she is so important. Loki goes to her. He says, I have found this other apples. I have found an orchard. I want you to come look at them with me. But bring your apples so we can compare, so we can make sure that they're just as good. Loki, always a trickster. Well, there's no orchard. That's not where he's taking her. He takes her, and she is immediately captured by this frost giant, Thrasse. And all of a sudden, the gods are without Idun, and they're without the apples. So the gods start to get old. They start to get frail and weak and old. They know this is Loki's fault. And so, as is often the case in these, they say, Loki, you need to fix this. And Loki, who caused the problem, says, okay, I'll fix the problem. And so Loki borrows a falcon guise from one of the goddesses. So Freya classically has this falcon guise where he can turn himself into a bird. And he puts this on, he turns into a bird, he goes out and looks for her, and he finds her. He finds Idun, and he turns her into a nut so he can grab her with his talons, and picks her up, and he starts fleeing back to the walls of Asgard. Well, this is another example of, much like with Odin and the poetry, of a god turning into a bird, and then the frost giant being able to turn into a bird and chase after him. This one, though, has a little bit of a different ending, or a twist on the ending, because Loki is able to get across the walls of Asgard, but so is Thrasse. He's able to get across it as well. But when he does, they have set this big fire on the inside of Asgard. And so he catches fire, so he can't fly anymore once he crosses the walls. And then they kill him within the walls of Asgard. This is a little bit different from the last example. The last example, the bird, the giant, was killed before he could get into their home. This giant is killed on their sacred grounds. And this is a violation of hospitality. So there's a difference here between what the gods have done. Now, the gods are happy because they have Idun and her apples back, but this is now going to lead to some more problems down the road.
There's a lot of blood feuds in this. And I think I said last episode, in this one, there's a lot of shapeshifting. It seems like all the giants can shapeshift. And the gods have specific ones and they can borrow them. They're transitive, which is really interesting. But I think it's very sweet and funny that Idun is turned into a nut.
That's right. She's a nut.
I didn't put it together that she's Bragi's wife. So he's telling the story of his wife's kidnapping and return.
Yeah.
Yeah. With Loki, I feel like they're always like, we'll torture you forever if you don't fix this.
Yeah. And then he sort of fixes it.
He's often tortured forever.
Or at least threatened. Thor threatens him a lot.
But blood feuds are a thing. And this happened inside, mine says within the Asgate, within Asgard. So Skadi, daughter of giant Thiassi, takes her helmet and mail coat and all weapons of war, and she goes to Asgard to avenge her father.
I love this. Because she's acknowledged to be in the right. There is a blood debt here. They have killed her father in a place where he should have been at least granted his life. I mean, even Thor won't kill people within the precincts of Asgard. And he's always happy to kill giants anywhere and everywhere. And so in this tradition, she could demand blood, or they can buy her off. There can be an atonement. There can be something else. And so she's got some fairly specific requests. One is she wants to marry one of the gods, and she wants to pick which god she marries, and she's got her eyes on Balder the Beautiful. The gods agree to this, but they say, you may choose whichever god you wish to marry, but only by their feet. The feet will be exposed, and that is how you will choose your husband. And so she sees the most beautiful set of feet. This must be Balder. But to her despair, when the guise is ripped away, it is the old god Njord, who happens to have beautiful feet.
I think I said last time, Njord has beautiful feet, and we don't find out why that is a Kenning, the god of beautiful feet, until right here.
That's right.
I actually think in Tricking of Gilf, because they do marry, and they seem, happy is a relative term, but they both hate where the other one likes to live.
Right. Because Njord is a sea god. He loves the ocean. He loves the cold. He loves that. She is a god of the mountains. She is a god that hates the ocean, and he hates the mountains. So they don't tend to live together very often. They, separate bedrooms kind of deal.
It reminds me of A Bird May Love a Fish, but where they build a home. Right. Anyway, like I said, these stories overlap, and here's where we learn that Njord has just beautiful feet. But there is more to pay.
There is more. She insists that the other thing is the gods must make her laugh. And I am curious how your translation describes this.
Well, Loki is often very evil, but he's also equally comic relief. Okay, yes. So I'm just going to read mine. Then Loki did as follows. He tied a cord round the beard of a certain nanny goat, and the other end round his testicles, and they drew each other back and forth, and both squealed loudly. Then Loki let himself drop into Skadi's lap, and she laughed. Then the atonement with her on the part of the Aesir was complete.
She just thought that was hilarious. Yours is a much better translation than mine, because mine substitutes tied a rope around his middle, which doesn't give the exact same thing. It's not clear why that would make her laugh. In this case, that's funny.
He goes full out.
He does.
He's going to fix this.
Well, he's going to be tortured forever if he doesn't.
He has incentive to fix this. But it also says that Odin, and I love this, as compensation for her, he took Thiassi's eyes, her father's eyes, and throws them up into the sky, and out of them makes 2 stars.
Yeah, I often have a hard time liking Odin, but things like this do show some magnanimity. I mean, they show some greatness of heart, because this, you get the impression reading through that this is above and beyond what she requested for atonement. Now, I went looking to see if we know which constellation or which stars these are.
Oh, that'd be good.
And I think we do. I think these are the eyes of Draco.
Oh,
the
great.
dragon. Yeah, I loved that. So now, again, that's a quick Google search. So if Google is wrong, I'm wrong. But I like the idea anyway.
Very good. And with the shape-shifting, at some point, I can't remember if it's this story or a different one, but they can tell often that an animal in a bird form or a fish form isn't really an animal, sometimes by the size, but often by the eyes. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting that they still even have Thiassi's eyes, this eagle that they burned in Asgard. But yes, that he tosses them into the heavens and they become stars. It's very beautiful.
Yeah, I like that. Well, the next story in mine is Thor and Hrungnir. In this story, Odin journeys to Jotunheim, home of the giants. And Odin, for some reason, is all about betting his head on things. That's the wager, right? If I win, you die. If you win, you take my head off. Here, he wagers that he has the best of horses. Now, we met this horse last week. This is Sleipnir, the great 8-legged horse of Odin, also the son of Loki, which is just hilarious. Listen to it. It's a funny story.
It is hilarious. That's my favorite one. Sorry, that's from last week. Keep going.
That's from last week. But this giant, Hrungnir, actually has a horse, and it has the beautiful name of Goldmane. And Goldmane is better than Sleipnir in this story. It's faster. And Odin immediately knows he's lost, but he doesn't stick around to do that whole losing of his head thing, and he flees. He hops on his horse and he runs away, with the giant gaining on him the whole time on his horse, until eventually Hrungnir ends up in Asgard. He's able to chase Odin through the gates of Asgard himself. Now, as we talked about it, once the giant is there, he is safe. He is not somebody who they can just kill. And so what happens is Hrungnir gets fated by the gods. He gets fed. The goddesses bring him wine, but he doesn't behave himself very well there. He's very insulting to the gods and the goddesses. And then Thor shows up. And Thor immediately grabs his hammer and gets angry, because why is this giant being served by Freya? I mean, it's just not okay. But even Thor isn't going to kill him within the bounds of Asgard. That would be a breach of hospitality. But Hrungnir here sees his chance, and he throws down a challenge against Thor. He says that he wants to fight Thor, and Thor is happy to take this challenge, but it's not going to be done in Asgard.
Mine says, Thor was eager not to let anything stop him from this. He's challenged to a duel, for no one had ever done that to him before. No one had ever been stupid enough to challenge Thor to a duel. Well, here it happened.
Here it happens. And so the duel gets arranged. There's a time and a place. The gods the frost giants are stoked. They're so excited that Hrungnir was finally able to do this and throw this challenge at the feet of Thor. But they also think he's going to die. Mm-hmm. So they come up with a plan. They make a giant creature of clay. They make this monstrous, it's almost what I would think of as a golem, right? Out of Jewish mythology. This giant creature of clay that is going to assist Hrungnir in this battle. Hrungnir has his shield, he's got his weapon, and for some reason his weapon is this great flint whetstone. So Hrungnir is ready to fight, but he now has this assistant. The problem is this great clay giant assistant needs a heart. And the only heart large enough to actually work in this is going to be the heart of a mare. Unfortunately, this is a timid heart. And so it says it flutters right within the chest of this other creature. Well, okay, here we are. The day arrives where there is going to be this duel taking place. And if the giant Hrungnir has an assistant, Thor also gets an assistant, and this is an assistant that we have met before. This is the young boy who is very fast that broke the legs of the goat, and Thor took him as a servant. This is the one who ran in the halls of Utgard Loki, losing only to Thought. Yeah, losing only to Thought in the race. Well, he's also fairly sharp. And he actually goes up before and talks to Hrungnir, and he says, I see you've got your shield in front of you. That's silly. Don't you know that Thor's going to come up out of the ground? He's going to go into the ground and come up and attack you from below. Having your shield in front of you isn't going to help you at all. Well, good luck. And then he goes away. The battle commences. And it doesn't take Thralfi any time at all to kill this mare's-hearted creation. It's down in basically one blow. And then we have Thor against Hrungnir. Well, Hrungnir has put his shield under his feet. He is blocking Thor from coming up from the ground. This was totally a dupe. Thor was never going to attack from the ground. He takes his hammer Mjolnir and he throws it at this giant. At the same time, the giant takes his flint whetstone and he throws it at Thor. They meet in midair, but when anything encounters Mjolnir, Mjolnir wins. So the whetstone splits in half, and half of it flies off, and this is how they get the formation of some mountains made of flint in the area. Mjolnir keeps going, buries itself in Hrungnir, and kills him immediately. But the other half of the flint whetstone flies true, and it strikes Thor in the head, and now he has shrapnel in his head that he can't get out. He has won the duel, but now he is in pain.
He's pinned under the giant's leg. Can't escape.
Mm-hmm.
Mine actually says when they're throwing these massive weapons at each other, there's lightnings and great thunders, which I think that's used in movies with the Thor's hammer where he can summon lightning down into it. But here, it's broken. He's pinned under this leg, and I love it. Thor's 3-year-old boy, Magni, shows up and heaves this giant leg off of Thor like it's nothing. And he says, isn't it a terrible shame, Father, that I arrived so late? I think I would have knocked this giant into hell with my fist if I had come across him. I like that Thor's proud.
Yeah.
He doesn't get angry at his boy for showing him up. He's proud.
And what we remember from the Fooling of Gilf last week when we talked about Ragnarok is that Magni is going to be there in the regeneration. In this new world, the sons of Thor will be there with his hammer. And so, yeah, I like that he shows up here. But Thor's still got a problem. He's got a headache. He's got a chunk of rock in his skull. And so this is another example of how these stories have kind of the feel of a dream, right? There are certain things in myth that you get one shot at, right? I mean, Frey got one sword, and when he gave it away, he was unarmed for Ragnarok. There's a lot of examples of that, how something can be done once, but if it's unsuccessful or gets interrupted, it can't be done again. And this moves into this story. He goes to a healer, to a wise woman. Her name is Groa. And he tells her, hey, I've got this whetstone in my head. And she says, no problem. I can fix that. And she starts to utter her words of power. She starts to sing her song to heal it. And Thor can feel the whetstone slipping out of his skull and knows that what she's doing is effective and is going to work. And he is so glad about this. And he is so grateful that he wants to give her something. And so he gives her information. He tells her that her husband, Orvandel the Bold, will be returning soon, that he has seen him coming back, because she doesn't know that her husband is coming back or even that he's alive. Well, she's so excited about this that she gets distracted and she messes up her words of power. She can't sing the song with the same effect, and the whetstone gets stuck in Thor's head forever.
Never comes out. Stuck forever. But the other thing about her husband is that he had a toe sticking out and it got frozen. So Thor had broken it off and threw it up into the sky and made a star out of it called Arvandel's toe.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
This was another one I looked up to see if I could find which star was Orvandel's toe. And this one I'm not sure because I came across two different options. So if anyone knows, please let me know. Or if it's a different one, I would love to know. The two options that came up most frequently was Rigel in Orion, so a bright star in Orion, or Capella, which is a bright star in the constellation Auriga. So I don't know if either of those is true, but I love that that they would look up, see a star, and have a story associated with it.
Yeah, and if you're getting lost in these stories, so did I. There's a reason Stevie tells them. He's so good at that. Our Vondel's toe seems so random to me. It's this one little side note story, but that's what this is. It's so many little stories all hooked together in this kind of complicated chain.
Yeah, but remember what gives Odin so much prowess, why he is considered so wise, so knowledgeable, is he knows all the stories. And anytime any of the gods go into this mortal home or this giant's home to seek wisdom and learning, these are the kinds of tidbits. This is the trivia that makes one wise in this culture. And so that's just fun. And then again, if you understand the concept of Kennings, which we've described, it lets you understand these stories. So there's kind of their encoded stories that all of a sudden become that much more valuable because you got to work for it, right? A fool will not enjoy these because he doesn't know. But if you have knowledge, you can enjoy them. And so it's a way of having this stratification of wisdom, which I think is fun and really interesting.
I think it'd be really comforting there's not a lot more of these instances where gods throw things into the sky and stars are made, at least in this. I'm sure there are more of those stories somewhere. There used to be. But how comforting would it be to look up at the sky and I know a story about that one. I mean, we have that to some extent with constellations, especially if you know the stars. But here there's extra layers to looking up at the night sky.
Yeah. And there's practical wisdom that comes from this as well. Because one of the things we learn out of this story, this is why it is absolutely forbidden to throw a flint whetstone. One must never throw one because of what happened to Thor.
I fully do that. I have never thrown a whetstone of any kind. You're welcome, Thor. Following the prompt. Okay.
Well, the stories keep coming thick and fast. And again, all these stories are being told actually in the work by Bragi. He's talking to Ægir as he's sitting at this banquet of the gods. And in my translation, there's one more story he tells, and this is Thor's journey to Geirröd's. Now, again, toilet humor is a thing in these. This isn't a particularly pleasant story, but there are kennings associated with it. And so let's begin. In this story, it once more starts with Loki. Loki starts most of these stories. He is at this point in bird form, and he is captured by the giant Geirröd. He is not able to escape, and kind of like before, he gets tortured for a while, but then he comes to a deal with his captor, and he agrees to Geirröd that he will bring Thor to him, but without his hammer, without his belt of strength, and without his iron gloves. So Thor will be weak. I mean, Thor's never really weak, but that's the idea, I think, behind the giants.
Less strong.
Yeah, they might have a chance at him if he doesn't have these magical implements that he carries around with him. So Thor agrees to go. I can't remember how Loki talked him into it, but he does. He journeys down and he's going to meet the giant Geirröd. Along the way, though, he meets a giantess. And this is, again, where I think this idea of anti-god is probably a little bit better than thinking of them as giants or giantesses. Because this anti-god actually pities Thor and is willing to help him. I mean, she knows what's going to go on. She has some sight ahead of her. And so she loans him a weapon. She loans him her staff. She doesn't have a hammer, but she has a staff. She loans him her belt of strength. She has one, and Thor gets to take it. And then she also loans him her iron gloves. So Thor is able to go on this journey with these different implements. They're not his, but we're going to find each of them useful in its own way. So the first problem Thor has on this journey is he comes to a river that he tries to cross. And again, I am curious how yours translate this scene.
The river?
Mm-hmm.
Thor saw in a certain cleft that the giantess's daughter, Gjalp, was standing astride the river and she was causing it to rise. Does that mean she was peeing in it?
Yes. This is a river of urine. This is giantess urine. And so when he says a river must be dammed at the source, what he does is he throws a stone at her and he kills her, and that lets the river recede. This is also, though, the first use of that belt of might that he gets loaned. He couldn't have gotten across the river without the strength that belt of might gave him.
River.
Yeah, river. So it's gross, but that's the first part of the story, and the giant's daughter is now dead.
Well, there's another kenning that comes from this, because to haul himself out of this, he hauls up on a rowan bush. The Thor's salvation is a rowan. So that is a common kenning for Thor, related to this rowan bush where he hauls himself out of a pea river.
Yeah, you wouldn't know about that if you didn't know about the pea river.
I assumed from my watered down description that she was peeing in it, yes.
Yeah, totally.
In this one, she's very big.
So Thor continues his journey, and he actually makes it into the home of the giant Geirröd. And so they offer him a place to sit. There's a cauldron that's been turned upside down. And so this is where Thor is given to sit. And he sits down, but all of a sudden he notices he's going up and the roof is above him. And they are trying to crush him between the cauldron and the roof. The giant's two other daughters are underneath the cauldron. And as soon as he sat down, they stood up. Well, Thor is very strong, and he's not going to allow this to happen. And he has the staff that the woman gave him. So he's able to push the staff against the ceiling, push himself down, and he ends up actually crushing the cauldron and the giant's two other daughters underneath. So again, he is solving his problems here by his own strength, but also by the gifts that he has been given. He then has a third problem, which makes sense because he was given 3 gifts. The third problem is that Geirröd decides, let's play some games. And he thinks a hilarious game would be to pull some red-hot iron out of the fire and to throw it at Thor. Fortunately, Thor has the iron gloves that the woman gave him. So he is able to catch the iron without harm and throw it back at Geirröd, killing him. And so Thor escapes.
Mine says that molten lump crashed through the pillar and through the giant and through the wall and so on into the ground outside. It doesn't just stop at the giant. It keeps going. This thing's like a meteor. It's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
So my book, after this story, it says that it names people by name, poets by name. Leif Gudrunarson, I'm sorry, everybody, I'm sorry, composed a passage based on this story in the Thor's Droppa. That's not part of the Edda. There are all these other tellings, and inside of it includes references. It includes kennings as a layered way of referring to things. I had to laugh because this one includes hostility acorns. But it meant their hearts.
I love it.
I don't know what that one comes from, but your heart can be referred to as a hostility acorn.
So my translation does similar, although it actually, I think yours has more in it than mine has in it. In addition to the stories, there are some just additional questions that ask. So there's like, how shall Idun be named? She is called the wife of Bragi, the keeper of the apples. But the apples are called the medicine to bar old age. She is also called the booty of the giant Thrasse, which we now know. So again, we start to get this very technical, very kind of workmanlike, here are the lists, here are the names, here are the different things. But in the story of the piece, we also do get a transition now, where up to this point, Ægir has been at the Feast of the Gods, but now the gods come to visit Ægir, and they feast in his home. And they get, again, these questions come up, things like, how shall gold be named? And things like that. And that one gets told by the invitation to the feast. We learn that in Odin's hall, it is lit by the brightness of swords. The swords shine, and that is what makes his hall a light. But Ægir is not a warrior in the same way that Odin is, and it is his hall, it is gold. It is gold that shines and gives light to the feast. And so how shall gold be named? It is Ægir's light, or various other names or terms or kennings associated with that.
There's a lot of stories about gold, the kennings associated with gold, so there's going to be more of those.
Yeah, well, I mean, the next one is, why is gold called Sif's hair?
This is my favorite one.
Is it?
From this part. Yes, it is.
Would you like to tell it?
No, you're very good. Go ahead.
It all starts with Loki, as it always does. For some reason that's not really clear why, Loki steals Sif's hair.
Mine says for love of mischief. He had cut off all her hair.
Okay, well, that's a bold move, because isn't Sif married to Thor?
I think so.
Yeah. Thor does not take this well. Again, he's got one speed and is angry. And so he comes after Loki and says, you need to solve this problem or I'll kill you. You'll be tortured forever. It's kind of the standard setup of one of these. Loki realizes he can do this because he knows the dwarves. And so Loki goes to the dwarves, and one dwarf in particular makes these 3 great treasures. They make Sif's hair that as soon as it puts on her head, it begins growing with his own life, this golden hair. This is a marvelous thing, but they're not done. And it's not clear to me why the other treasures get made, but they make them. So they make one that we've already heard of, and this is Skidbladnir. So this is the ship of Frey. This is that great ship that can expand to fit any army, any group of people, but it can be folded down to the size that it'll fit in a pocket. This is the best of ships, and this is part of this 3-fold craft. The other one they make is Gungnir, and I don't think we've talked about this yet. Most people know that Thor's weapon is Mjolnir, the hammer, but Odin has a famous weapon too, and this is his spear. So he is a spear warrior, and his spear is Gungnir. And that is the third of these great things that get made.
What will the spear do?
It's just awesome.
Is it super sharp or something?
It must be.
I mean, because the hammer has special powers. There must be something exemplary about this spear, because all these things have something amazing.
Yes. I do not know what they are.
I don't know that story.
Yeah.
It says that Loki takes a bet with these dwarves. So one dwarf built these 3 awesome things for Loki, but he has a brother. And Loki wagers his head, much like Odin, he learned from him, that his brother can't make 3 things, 3 precious things as good as these were. And so this dwarf, Ægir, I think, he makes 3 things. And the description of how he makes them is gross. He has a forge, and in the first one, he puts in a pig's hide, and he ends up making this golden boar with these bristles. It's amazing.
Yeah, a golden pig.
But meanwhile, this fly settles on his arm, and it says if he's distracted for a moment, it'll be all messed up. The boar will not turn out. So this fly just eats away at his arm. It nibbles while he works.
Yeah, there's the craftsman, and then there's his brother. The other dwarf is actually manning the forge, is actually flaming the forge so that this craftsman brother can do what he needs to do. But if he stops fanning the forge, the fire will go out, and these things just won't work anymore. They won't be created. But yeah, now there's a distraction. There's this fly that is settled upon him and is going to town on him, but he is so diligent that he continues, and this boar gets created, and it is perfection. The next one's pretty cool that he makes too.
He puts gold into the forge, and the forge is blowing the whole time. Don't stop or it'll be messed up. But here the fly settles on his neck, and it eats at him twice as hard, but he keeps on blowing until the smith takes out a gold ring called Draupnir.
And we are going to meet Draupnir again, and we have actually met Draupnir before. It gets mentioned as the best of rings in the lists of the things Odin has. This is a ring that every 9 days, it makes 8 identical copies of itself. So untold wealth. You can always generate more wealth by the power of this golden ring. And rings are so important in this culture. I mean, ring giver is a common name we came across. It was really sort of a kenning in Beowulf about the kings, the noble kings. And so, of course, Odin is going to be the greatest of these because of Draupnir, this ring. This ring, we actually learned last week, got placed on Baldur's funeral pile, even. And so it's an important ring, and it's going to show up again in the longest of the stories we're going to tell today.
Well, this guy has to make a 3rd item, and he puts iron in the forge this time. And this is going to be amazing. He's going to make a hammer. But the fly settles between his eyes and nibbles at his eyelids, and the blood runs down, and finally he can't take it anymore. The billows stop. So this amazing hammer has a fault. It has a short handle.
And everyone agrees that this is a fault, but it's still awesome because this hammer is Mjolnir. This is Thor's great hammer.
So there's judgment, right? There's Loki's 3 items, then there's these 3 items. They're placed before the gods, and it is decided that the hammer is best of all. And yeah, this is the backstory to Mjolnir, how Thor gets it, and Odin gets that awesome ring. Here's that story.
Mm-hmm. So we remember there was a bet here. Loki had bet his head that these final 3 weren't going to be as good. And we also realized that that fly that was trying so hard to stop the dwarves, that was Loki, trying to save his head. He is not above cheating, but it doesn't matter because he lost. But they don't kill Loki. Again, the dwarves could. He's in their power, but they choose to do something different. So much trouble happens when Loki talks. I mean, it's like the old joke, right? How do you know Loki is lying? His lips are moving. I mean, anytime he talks, it causes problems for everyone around him. So the dwarves forfeit their right to his head, and rather they sew his lips shut. They take an awl and thread and they sew his lips shut. And this actually shows up in a lot of Norse art. You will see carvings of a god, of a man, and he'll have marks on his lips, scars. That is Loki from this story.
Well, I like that there's details given about the hammer, okay? So he gave Thor the hammer and said he would be able to strike as heavily as he liked, whatever the target, and the hammer would not fail. And if he threw it at something, it would never miss and never fly so far that it wouldn't find its way back to his hand. And if he liked, it was so small that it could be kept inside his shirt. It does have the defect, though, of having the very short handle. I didn't know about that he can carry it in his pocket. He'd always have it with him. And it makes sense. Last week we talked about when Thor hauls up the world serpent, the Midgard serpent out of the ocean. He throws the hammer at it, even though the line is cut. And so there's question whether or not the serpent would be dead because the hammer had to hit it. That's part of what it does.
Yeah.
But no, the serpent will be there at Ragnarok.
Yes, it comes back. So, I mean, these stories are great. I love Loki getting his mouth sewn shut. I mean, that's just funny to me.
I think it's funny. It has a name. The thong that Loki's mouth was stitched up with is called Vartari. They named it.
Deservedly so.
I mean, he's such a pain.
Yeah. Yeah, he causes a lot of trouble, including the end of the world. So,
right.
Yeah. All right. So I think we should go a little bit out of order here because the next story in my translation gets into the Niflungs. But that is a long and complicated story with multiple subplots. So I think we should do a couple of the other shorter stories first and then end with that one. Is that okay?
Sure.
So Minya and Finja. This answers a question, why is gold called Frodi's meal? And this story answers the question. There is a king of Denmark named Frodi. Frode is how it's spelled in my book. And he has a mill that is magical. This mill will generate anything you ask it to grind out. And so during the reign of this good king, he asked for 2 things to be ground from this mill. He asked for gold and peace, and both exist in plenty during the golden age of his reign. So that's our answer. Why is gold called Frodi's meal? But there's another important part to this, is that he needs somebody to do the milling. And so he comes across these 2 women, Minya and Finja. And they are obviously giantesses. They're obviously anti-gods, but they are on board with this. They're willing to do it. And they sing this song. The mill is called Grota. So the song they sing is the Grota song, and they sing it while they're milling. But these 2 seem fairly happy to be milling the gold and the peace for King Frodi. But eventually he is killed and a wicked king overcomes him. And the new king asks them to grind salt. And for some reason, he's taken both these women and this mill on his ship at sea. So he's on his long ship at sea, and so he has them grind salt. But he is a greedy man. He is a wicked man. And what ends up happening is the ship sinks, he dies, but these 2 goddesses continue to grind salt because that was the last command from this mill. And this is why the ocean is salty.
I like that they ask, like, do you want us to stop? And he says, no, keep going.
Hubris.
And it all ends up in the sea, and the sea becomes salty.
And then the song gets listed out in my translation. So he does bring poems into this. This is the prose Edda, but there are poems, and the Grota song is one that you can read if you buy this work. And it's cool. And kind of through it, they sort of tell in song and poetry this story that Snorri tells in prose. The last short story that I'd like to talk about is involving a king, Rolf Kraki. This is one that I want to read more about this guy, because every time I take a class or watch something on the sagas, the saga of Rolf Kraki just sounds awesome. There's so much magic in it and so many cool things. And there's less of that in this, but he just seems like a fascinating character. He was a king of Denmark, and I think he's really interesting.
The Kenning associated is Kraki's seed. Why is gold called Kraki's seed?
Mm-hmm.
That's this story.
Yep. Quick aside on Rolf Kraki, we have actually met him before. It is generally thought that in the work Beowulf, he is Hrolf, Hrothgar's nephew.
Oh, okay.
So he plays a minor role. And actually, in the stories of Rolf Kraki, I don't think the ones we read in this one, there is a character that they're pretty certain is Beowulf playing a minor role. So there's a combination of the two. So again, I want to read more about Rolf Kraki. But what we learn in here is it starts with his interaction with somebody named Vog. Vog is much of a lesser person, and he's very rude and very demeaning to the king. And the king, though, listens to him and asks him things. And Vog calls him a crow. He says, you're not really a king, you're just a crow. And the king actually takes that title on himself, because in the language, crow is Kraki. And so that's how Rolf Kraki gets his title of crow. But the other thing, he says, well, you're insulting me here, you should give me a gift. And Vog says, I don't have anything to give you. And the king says, you're right. Well, I have gifts to give. And he gives him a gift of a ring. And this immediately switches him to his side. And so it's these kind of interactions that establish his character as a good king and as a good man who's willing to even take insults, but to win loyalty out of these others.
Yeah, I'm going to read some of my translation because I think it's helpful. It says that Hrolf Kraki is the most notable of ancient kings, primarily for generosity and valor and humility. And Vog, not only is he kind of a nobody, mine says he's a little boy and a poor one who walks up to the king, and the king allows it. He allows this little boy to come talk to him and insult him and give him a name, Crow. He says, you boy have given me a name, that I shall be called Hrolf Kraki, and it is customary to give a gift to confirm a christening. And then he says, I see you haven't got one. Let me give you one. And he gives him that ring. But a christening, how great.
Yeah. Well, the stories of Rolf Kraki continue. His mother is married to the king of Sweden. So this is King Adolf's. So they use the term Uppsala, which is the city, the capital there. But this is the king of Sweden. Now, Rolf Kraki is engaged with his own wars at the time, so he can't get away, but he sends some of his men, and specifically, he sends his 12 berserkers. Now, we haven't talked about berserkers yet, but these are a fascinating aspect of Norse myth. The idea is that these are warriors specifically blessed by Odin, who literally go berserk in battle. It's said that they don't need armor because their skin becomes hard. There's all these discussions about possible connections to bears and shamanistic rituals. The bottom line is they're just insane on the battlefield. These are warriors blessed by Odin. And so these berserkers go to work for the king of Sweden on behalf of Rolf Kraki. And of course they win because they're awesome. Part of the deal, though, was that they were going to get some payment that they could take back to their king as part of them being lent. But the king of Sweden says no, and he denies them any payment for their services. So Rolf Kraki goes to confront him. And while he's there, they're almost burned alive. He and his berserkers are in a hall, and it is set on fire. Now, Rolf Kraki and his warriors have taken an oath to never flee from fire or from iron, right? I mean, and that's a pretty cool oath, right? That says they're always going to go into battle, always going to go into the conflict. Well, if this place is burning around them, they have taken an oath to not flee from them. But Rolf Kraki says it's not fleeing, to go through it. And he actually increases the fire. He starts throwing things onto the fire, and then he runs over it with his berserkers, and he's able to basically take on this battle. And again, it just shows his general awesomeness. But the question of gold, right? Why is that called Kraki's seed? Comes to this next story. So he is still in this conflict with the Swedes and with this king, and it is said that he has been given a deer horn full of gold, which as either in this combat, he ends up throwing it on the ground, and the king of the Swedes stoops down to pick up this gold. And Rolf Kraki says, I have made you stoop, right? He has conquered this other king through gold. And you see sort of the greed of the one king and the nobility of Rolf Kraki. So this gold he has put on the ground, this is this seed through which he has won. He has triumphed over his enemy. He's a cool guy.
So question for you, brother. These are kings. These are men, ancient kings, the Frodi and Rolf Kraki. Are there more stories that you know of where the gods intervene in these stories? Because they are part of the Kennings, but the stories in this, the gods mess with frost giants, but not so much gods with men.
Yes, and this is where the sagas are so interesting. In the sagas and in tales that are just told, yes, the gods will intervene directly, most commonly Odin. Odin tends to be the one that is most frequently involved. And again, it's usually not a good thing if he's involved with your family. But this actually leads really well into the biggest and the last of these stories, the story of the Niflungs. Now, this is one that I'm going to struggle a little bit in the telling because it's told at some length in the prose Edda, but it's also told in at least 2 other places that I know of. And I'm sure there may be more out there that I'm not aware of, but there is the saga of the Volsungs. That is this story. There is also Der Nibelungenlied. I'm sorry, Germans. This is the Ring story, and actually that work independently we may do someday on this show because it stands in its own right as a great German epic. But these are all stories around this Volsung family, and you will see here the way the gods interact, and particularly Odin sets things on its course. In the prose Edda version, he's there at the start, but is kind of hands off after that. But in some of these other versions, he keeps showing up at various points in order to move the story along. And sometimes it seems like the story goes actually against his will, but that's a whole different discussion.
All right, this launches with, what is the reason for gold being called otter payment?
Again, you have the gods journeying, and in particular, you have Odin and Loki journeying together. And they are traveling along, and they're in the water, and they kill an otter. It's just an otter. It's literally otter is the name. They continue to travel, though, and they accept hospitality from a man named Hreidmar. And Hreidmar sees the otter and says, that's my son. And so now we have this blood debt. Odin and Loki have killed this man's son. And so Hreidmar has the ability to determine a ransom. What will I take as payment for the death of my son? And what he says is, you will cover his entire body in gold. That will be my ransom for your slaying of my son Otter. Well, Odin says Loki on this one. So Loki goes out and he doesn't give this gold. He goes and steals it from somebody else. So there is somebody named Andvari, which is usually described as a dwarf, but in this case, he's described as a fish. He's disguised. He is shape-changed into this form. And Loki captures him and steals all his gold. Andvari tries to hold one thing back. He tries to hold back a ring. This ring was going to sound familiar, because it says it can replicate itself 8 times once every 9 days. We learned that same thing from Draupnir. So this is, if it's not Draupnir, it is identical to that ring.
So in some stories, did Odin give that ring to this dwarf?
Not that I know of. And this is, again, where some of the stories don't really make sense. I think that in some stories, this is where Odin got it. But in this story and this saga, this ring becomes cursed because Loki demands to have that ring as well. Because Andvari says, no, if you let me keep this, I can regenerate my wealth over time. But Loki isn't having any of it, and he demands it. And Andvari puts a curse on this ring. And so this is now a cursed ring and a cursed treasure. Well, Loki takes the gold back to Odin, and Odin gives all the gold to Hreidmar to cover up the body of Otter. But he holds back the ring because he wants it. It's beautiful, and it's valuable. Well, there is a single whisker not covered by gold, and Hreidmar demands that that be covered. And so this cursed ring gets passed on from Odin to Hreidmar.
The curse in mine says, this ring should be the deadly destruction of whoever possessed it. And Loki says, that's fine. I'll take it.
He's good with that.
He's going to pass it on anyway.
Yeah. Well, with the mortals, things don't work out so well. So Odin and Loki leave, and that's really the end of their participation in this story, as far as I know. Although, again, in other versions of this, Odin is a much more active character. Hreidmar has two other sons besides Otter. He has Regin and Fafnir. They start to lust after the gold. They want this treasure. And so they kill their father. And Fafnir is definitely the strongest and the most powerful of these. And he banishes his brother Regin, saying that he will kill him if he stays around. And Fafnir turns into a dragon on this cursed horde. And so he is this mighty creature now defending this cursed horde of gold. And Regin gets turned away. Enter the Volsungs. So Regin journeys to Sigurd. Sigurd is the great hero of this entire story. And he is taught by Regin how to do some things. In particular, he's taught in the art of smithcraft. And this is where they fashion and create the sword Gram. Gram. And you will see this in a lot of art, the forging of the sword. The whole point of the forging of the sword, though, is to have a weapon for Sigurd to kill Fafnir and help Regin get back his gold. Regin is shy on details here, though. He doesn't really tell everything to Sigurd, but Sigurd is ready for adventure. He has the sword, and he's ready to go out and kill the dragon. If there's one thing we learn about killing of dragons in most of these old stories, find a pit. Find a hole to stand in and attack the dragon from the underneath. And this is what Sigurd does, and he ends up killing Fafnir, which then releases this gold from this horde. But this gold is still cursed, and remember, Regin is one of the brothers that was willing to kill his father for this gold, and he immediately does some things that I would say are rather strange. The first thing is he drinks his brother's blood. The blood of this dead dragon he consumes. He then tells Sigurd, I'm going to take a nap now, but while I do, cut out his heart and roast it for me so I can eat it. And this is a motif that we've seen several times in different stories. As Sigurd is roasting the heart, he reaches out to touch it to see if it's done. And he then puts his finger to his lips, and on the consuming this, right, on having tasted the heart, he is able to hear the voice of the birds around him. And they warn him that Regin means to kill him and not give him any of the treasure. So Sigurd one-ups him, and he kills Regin, and now this treasure is his own. I said this is a long story. That's just the first part.
Well, he goes and collects the gold. First steps, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then he keeps traveling, and he finds a woman sleeping in a mountain, a building on a mountain, and she's wearing a helmet and mail coat. And it turns out she's a Valkyrie.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Brynhild. But then he keeps going. There's nothing there.
Yeah.
She comes back later, but then she's a Valkyrie, moving on.
Moving on, exactly.
He continues on to find a king and his family, and he lives with them for a while, and he marries one of the king's daughters.
Yeah, and again, I know there's a lot of names here, and this gets confusing, but I am going to say the names on this, and This is one that when you read it, it can get overwhelming with the different names and the family dynamics. So let's try and sort this out a little bit. This king has 3 children right now. Gudrun is the woman, and that's who Sigurd marries. This becomes the wife of Sigurd. But he also has 2 sons, Gunnar and Hogni. And this is a good family. This is a true king. These are good princes. She's a good princess. This is a good family for Sigurd to enter into. Gunnar, though, is not married yet, and he has heard of this woman. He has heard of this Valkyrie named Brynhilda. We've already met her because Sigurd cut off her coat of mail, but she is in this home with this ring of fire around it. And it is said that the only one that she will ever marry is somebody brave enough to ride a horse through this ring of fire, and that will be her husband. Well, Gunnar is ready to do this. He's a brave man, and he is good to go. But he asks Sigurd to come with him up to this fire wall. And they get to the fire wall, and Gunnar takes his horse and lays spurs, and he's ready to go through it. But his horse will not go. His horse will not go through this fire. Sigurd has a very special horse. This is Grani. And in some of the other stories, this is a horse actually given to him by Odin. So this is one of those examples where the gods intervene. Well, Grani can go through this fire. He doesn't have a problem with it. But he will not follow any commands of anybody besides Sigurd. So Gunnar cannot ride this horse through, and his own horse won't go through. So they come up with a plan, and what they decide is that they are going to disguise Sigurd as Gunnar. He is going to ride through, and then he's going to ride back out, but he's going to tell Brynhild that he is Gunnar. And this is what happens. And so Sigurd rides through. Now remember, Sigurd is already married to Gudrun. And he is doing this because he has a sworn brotherhood now with actually both Gunnar and the other brother, Hogni. And so Sigurd's willing to do this for him. Little surprised that he recognizes this lady on the other side of the firewall, but she accepts him as the man who has accomplished this. And so it says they spend several nights together, but Sigurd lays his sword, Gram, between them. So he doesn't do anything here with her physically, but he has claimed her on behalf of Gunnar. And it said that they trade rings. And remember that cursed ring? Yep, it shows up again. That's what he gives to her, and then she gives him a ring. And then Sigurd rides out of there, hands the ring to Gunnar, and this is how Brynhild ends up marrying Gunnar. Again, long story and complicated, but that's fascinating, and that's really, really interesting. What could go wrong now, right? You have these 2 happily married couples. You have Sigurd and Gudrun, and they have some children, and then you have Gunnar and Brynhild, and things are great. Except for they aren't.
Well, the women start talking.
Yeah. Isn't this where they go to wash their hair?
They go to wash and bleach their hair. And they're basically bragging about having a better husband. And here, Gudrun, Sigurd's wife, says, "You think that was Gunnar? You're wrong." So this woman who thinks she married this man who came across this fire, this ring of fire, that was her line for what, the man she'd marry. Turns out she was wrong.
And there's proof, because Gudrun can produce the ring that Brynhild gave to Sigurd. Brynhild does not handle this well.
Everybody kills everybody.
But it's complicated the way this plays out. So Brynhild here decides, no, this cannot stand. And the one she gets angry at is actually Sigurd. She gets angry at Sigurd, not Gunnar, not her husband, not any of these. And she demands the death of Sigurd. Well, remember, Gunnar and Hogni have sworn brotherhood to Sigurd. They can't do it. But they have a brother, Guthorm. And Guthorm was too young to swear that brotherhood. And so he can actually engage in this task without the loss of honor that would accrue to either Gunnar or Hogni. This gets confusing, and there's actually echoes of the Balder story in this. Remember with the Balder story that when Balder was slain, they were looking for somebody to kill the blind god Hodir, but nobody could do it because they had these binds, but they had to have this other god kind of born and in the first day of his life kill him. Again, it has to do with these complex ties, these oaths, these relationships. And so Guthorm says, yeah, I'll do it. But Sigurd is just too great of a warrior to kill in any sort of open battle, so this can only be done by treachery. And so what Guthorm does is he sneaks on him when he's in bed and stabs him, kills him while he's in bed, and then he goes to run away. But Sigurd is so manly that even pierced to the death, he wakes up and he throws his sword, Gram, after him, and he kills Guthorm as well. So his killer is slain, but so is Sigurd. Think about this in this society. Sigurd, who Odin would definitely want with him at Ragnarok, has been killed in bed, not in battle. So where does he go? He doesn't go to Valhalla. This greatest of the warriors goes to hell. It's a tragedy on so many levels. But guess what? The story isn't over, nor is the tragedy.
Can I recap? Because I had to read this one so many times, brother.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Okay, so we have our hero, Sigurd.
Yes, we do.
Who marries a lady, and apparently they're happy.
Yes.
But he has brothers, not by blood, but by marriage. And they basically trade these so that the brother can marry a Valkyrie.
Yes.
The two ladies go to wash their hair, and the Valkyrie lady learns she's been tricked and gets very angry. And so the hero dies. His son is killed, and then the Valkyrie kills herself.
Yes.
Everybody dies. It's so sad.
Well, not everybody, but for some reason...
all those people die.
All those people die. I don't know why Brynhilda gets to take charge of the funeral arrangements, but she does, and in doing so, she does kill Sigurd's son, and she puts his sword on the bier with him, and she kills herself and joins him on the bier to try to be with him in the afterlife, because Brynhild loves Sigurd. It's fairly toxic, I would say.
So the hero's wife, though, is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
What's her name? Gudrun. She's beautiful and gets taken, by Brynhild's brother. The Valkyrie has a brother. The whole thing it's like a soap opera.
It is, and when you read through sagas, this kind of multi-generational storytelling is very common and is part of what makes them fascinating. Normally, this is Icelandic families and their various blood feuds in the sagas. But in the saga of the Volsungs, you get this. And then you get these other stories that get kind of tacked onto it. And so the story keeps growing and spreading. And so, where we're at now, Gudrun, largely we think against her will, it's just not up to her, is now married to King Atli. In other versions of this, it's literally Attila the Hun.
Oh, my.
Yeah. But in this one, it's just called King Atli. And then the story continues at this point. Atli is not a good king, and he is greedy. And remember that whole gold, that hoard of gold that was the Weir Guild from the death of Otr? That still belongs to Gudrun's family. So Gunnar and Hogni have that gold. And so King Atli brings them to him to try and basically torture them and get them to give him the gold. And again, I can't remember how much of the story is in this version versus some of the other ones I've read because they're all blending in my brain right now. But the way some of the final forms of this story go is that Hogni and Gunnar are now separated, right? These were the blood brothers of Sigurd that are also responsible for his death. But they are separated and they are both being tortured. And so Gunnar says, I will tell you where the gold is, but you need to bring me my brother's heart. Now that seems really cruel, but the idea is that he's being tortured anyway. So this is actually a pretty easy way for his brother to die. And then he's the only one with the secret. And he's not going to give up the secret. He's willing to be tortured. Well, there's this whole sequence of this that's pretty fascinating. It says that the people are actually so impressed by Hogni that they don't want to kill him. So they kill a slave instead, and they bring Gunnar his heart. And Gunnar looks at it and says, no, that's quaking and flopping. That's not my brother's heart. And so they end up finally killing Hogni and bringing his heart. And he says, yes, that is the mighty heart of my brother. And then he says, yeah, I'm never telling you anything. You've lost. King Atli is so furious that he throws Gunnar into a pit of snakes. He throws him into a pit of venomous serpents. But while he is thrown in, his sister, Gudrun, tosses him a harp. And it is said that his hands are bound, so he can only play the harp with his toes. And he is in this venomous pit playing the harp with his toes, soothing the serpents so that they don't bite him. But then eventually one does, and Gunnar dies in this ridiculously brave way with this artistic flourish on the harp that he's playing with his toes. This is another one you'll see a lot in art. You'll see the twisting serpents and the man playing a harp with his toes. And so here you have the deaths of Hogni and Gunnar, which are Gudrun's brothers.
Yeah, mine says these brothers are invited by the king to come as guests, but they know he's a bad guy. It says before they left home, they hid the gold, Fafnir's legacy, in the Rhine, and this gold has never again been found. And King Atli captures them both, cuts out Hogni's heart while he was alive. And then, Gunnar is thrown into the snake pit. But apparently he's very good with his toes.
Oh, yeah.
Because all the snakes but one fall asleep. And it's this one adder that gets him. And it ends with Gunnar and Hogni, the brothers, are known as Niflungs and Gjokungs. Hence, gold is called Niflung's treasure or inheritance. So what is the name Niflungs and Gjokungs? Do you know?
No, I don't. But I know that Niflung and Nibelung and various sounding names all get associated with this family.
Crazy that all that started with killing an otter.
Killing an otter.
What is the reason for gold being called otter payment?
Yeah.
That's the story.
Well, you would think the story ends there.
Part of the story.
But there is still more suffering to happen.
Yeah.
Because Gudrun is still alive. And remember, Gudrun was the wife of Sigurd and the sister of these great heroes. And she is not going to let this pass. And so this reads like something out of, Titus Andronicus or some of the more darker, older stories. She kills the sons of Atli, the king who has killed her brothers, and she cooks them. She creates drinking vessels from their skulls, and she feeds her husband with them. And then once he knows that he has consumed the flesh of his sons, she kills him. And so Gudrun gets her revenge for her brothers on the king who caused their death.
I mean, to be clear, these are her sons as well.
Yeah.
But they are his sons, and she hates him.
Now, you would think the story would be over there. But it is not, because Gudrun is apparently still beautiful, and somehow she didn't die after the king was killed, and so she got married off to another king. And so this is King Janakr. And with King Janakr, she has 3 other sons, Sorli, Hamdar, and Erp. So she has 3 more sons. But she also had a daughter. So this was the daughter that she had with Sigurd way back in the beginning. And this daughter is beautiful. And another king, and again, you don't need to remember all these names, but King Jormunrek hears of her beauty, how gorgeous this young girl is. And so he sends his son to bring her back to him so he can marry her. His son's name is Randver. And as I'm reading this story, I'm just thinking Tristan and Isolde. Because what happens is the son of the king sees this beautiful young woman and falls in love with her himself. And so the two of them become an item. And the old wicked king back home, well, she doesn't want to marry him anyway. So you have the prince and you have this young woman, and they become a couple. But they are betrayed. And so Randver is sentenced to death. But before he dies, again, there's all these kind of poetic moments that happen, these gestures. Randver asks for a hawk and he's given a hawk, and he rips out the feathers of the hawk and then hands it back and says, give that to my father. And Randver the prince is killed, and this defeathered hawk is given back to the king. And the king looks at it and he understands the message. He has destroyed his own posterity. As the hawk can no longer fly without feathers, his line will no longer continue because he has destroyed his son. It doesn't stop him from killing Swanhild, though. And so we have the death of the daughter of Sigurd and Gudrun, as well as her lover, but the king is still alive. Well, Gudrun isn't done with her revenge tour. She is not okay with the death of her daughter, but she's got 3 new sons now. She has Sorli, Hamdar, and Erp, and she is going to tell them to take revenge and to go kill the king. Well, Sorli and Hamdar are on board. They're willing to do this, but Erp isn't around. And so they go ask Erp, basically, will you help us? And he tells them this cryptic line, I will give you the help that the hand gives to the foot. Well, they think that's ridiculous. What kind of help can a hand give to a foot? And so they kill him because that's the kind of story this is. And then these 2 older sons go on to King Yannikar to do the deed. On their way, one of them is walking and he stumbles, he trips, and he reaches out his hand to steady himself so he doesn't fall completely. And he realizes, oh, we may have made a mistake in killing our brother because the hand does help the foot in this way. Anyways, the story goes on that they come upon the king in his bedchamber, and one of them cuts off his hands, one of them cuts off his feet. But Erp isn't there, so there's no one to cut off his head, which means the king can cry out for help, and the sons are captured and killed. The king is dead too. He's lost his hands and his feet. So they've been successful in revenge, but they are now dead too because they killed their brother. This is actually the end of the story.
There are descendants, and I like that one of them, his name is Sigmund. It says that he's so tough that he could drink poison and not be harmed. Reminded me of Rasputin.
Mm-hmm.
Drink poison, not be hurt.
Yeah, and the descendants get their own stories and other like I say, we're probably going to have to do the Nibelungs at some point because there's more to this than what we've just gone over. Now, there is one last story that I don't actually know if is connected with this story or not, because there's somebody named Hogni. Hogni, as we remember, is one of those brothers. There was Gunnar and Hogni. So I think this is a different Hogni. I don't think it's the same, but it's kind of an interesting story. So the last one, just for completion's sake, let's do it. So Hild is the daughter of Hogni, and she is taken prisoner and married to a man named Hedin. It sounds like Hedin and Hild actually get along okay, but Hogni is not willing to accept this situation, and so he brings his armies to confront Hedin. And so you have the armies of Hogni and you have the armies of Hild, and they gather on an island in the Orkneys. So one of these northern islands off the coast of Britain. They cannot be reconciled. Hild tries. She tries to get in between them and to stop this battle from occurring, but they are not willing, and so battle commences. And it's said that they fight from the morning till the night, and many are slain and many are killed. But then over the night, Hild uses her magic. She has powers, and she resurrects the fallen, and then they fight again the next day, and the next day, and the next day. And it's this crazy Twilight Zone island where it says they will be fighting until Ragnarok. And that's the last of the stories in my translation of the Skáldskaparmál.
Following that, though, is all the lists of Kennings. And this turns into the part where I started to skim, brother.
Well, my translator didn't even translate them.
Oh, you don't have them?
No, they're not in mine.
Oh.
So you're not the only one who skimmed.
Well, he references dozens and dozens and dozens of different poets and the different things that they say about them and how there's Kennings associated with them. But those stories you just told, that's the basis for so many of them. For so many of these Kennings that people could just hear and use. And realize what was being told to them in this wonderful poetry and these wonderful stories without hearing the whole story each time.
Mm-hmm. There is one part of this prose Edda left, which again, my interpreter didn't interpret at all. So I have none of it in my book. But there is the final section, the Hatatal, which is essentially a list of verse forms. We're not going to talk about the Hatatal because, again, I don't even have it translated in my book, but it does speak to the purpose of this overall work, that this was an attempt to save these stories of the past and to help people understand the poetry and to help people continue to write poetry in this fashion. So the Hatatal, as I understand, because I have read it before in other translations, is very technical. It's verse forms, it's meter, it's how you actually go about constructing it. It would be like if somebody was describing, okay, here's a limerick, and here's how you write one. Here's a haiku, and here's what that means. Here's a sonnet, and what that means. And then with lots of examples and lots of kind of critique about good and bad in either way.
Yeah, for me, the Hatatal was overwhelming in nature, but it is Snorri's, I think, attempt to kind of integrate all these things into examples of what it would look like and to preserve that. But I actually really love the Kennings in general. They're very hard to read in list form. Again, it'd be like picking up a thesaurus just to read it for fun. Mm-hmm. But there's kind of these categories of Kennings that I think are important. So they tell us something about the world for these people at that time where it originates in violence. It's all violent, but there's also this circular nature to the whole thing. So way back at the beginning, Ymir is killed, but the world is created. Okay. So this with the poetry, Kvasir is slain, but poetry comes from it. And Vari's robbed, but then some gold is changed by it. All these things have these repercussions and these ripple effects down through time. Sometimes there's good outcomes. Most of the time, it's the downside. So especially with gold, what did you do? 5 different stories about why gold is called something sad?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are more.
Yes. I don't know. Just the idea that this wealth and this gold, I mean, it's kind of cursed. It's the origination of dragons. That guy turns into a dragon so that he can protect it. It's this greed and that idea. So these feelings about these big things that we have still today are told in these stories and through these kennings where I think the Frodi's meal one is really interesting because Frodi's meal, I thought it was food, but they're grinding. It's grist mill. It's Frodi's meal. Mm-hmm. But that's how salt of the earth, salt of the sea comes from. That's awesome.
And that before that, he chose to grind gold and peace. I love that you can grind peace as a physical substance that then is granted to the land. That's beautiful.
I wonder what you put in.
Based on these stories, I'm not sure I want to know.
I also want to mention Odin. Odin's role is really interesting to me because he is the all-father, but he came to it through the killing of his father. Clearly a terrible being, actually, Ymir. Was there anything redemptive about Ymir? I don't think so.
No, other than that he provides structure to the world, but that's not intentional. That's against his will.
So with Odin and Valhalla, I think this concept is interesting. So you have to die in battle to go to Valhalla. Yes?
Yes.
And the idea is that they fight and drink and eat for however long until Ragnarok, and then they would come fight at that time.
Yes.
So the more men who died in battle would be there at Ragnarok to fight for the gods.
Yeah, you get this sense that Odin is always trying to come up with an advantage for that battle, that he's always trying to win it, but we know he's doomed. So it's really interesting.
Does everybody, both sides in the battle, if they die in battle, they go to Valhalla?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, so you could be on opposite sides. You can kill each other, and then you get to fight tomorrow in the halls of Valhalla.
So what is Odin's relationship to the Valkyries?
The Valkyries are the choosers of the slain. So they go over the battlefields, and they take the souls of those killed to Valhalla.
So they're a messenger, or do they have a designation? Like, do they participate in the battle?
I don't believe so, no.
And so Odin doesn't get to vote? That's a Valkyrie thing? Just curious. I think this is a really odd
It's a good question.
interaction.
Well, and this leads to some interesting things in the story of the Volsungs, which we just talked about. Because again, Odin wants these great warriors to die in battle so he can have them, but Sigurd didn't. And so was his will thwarted? It certainly sounds like it in that case, because he would have rather he had died in battle. You get the sense in some of the stories that he actually causes the defeat of some of his favorites in battle just so he can get them to come up with him. So that question of does he choose, I think within certain limits he does, but ultimately it's that death in battle that is really what stamps your ticket. And then it's the Valkyries that are overseeing that and then can bring them up once they are dead.
So what I wanted after reading the Edda is more about Odin. Because there are stories about Odin in here, but like the tricking of Gylf, there's not a ton. And like you said, it's often Odin doing the questioning. That's not in here all that much. So I'm curious to read more about Odin, especially because this idea of battle. So I did learn wolves and ravens. That's an Odin thing.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about a battlefield, wolves and ravens seem relevant.
Yes.
And so I don't know. I'm curious about the kind of the cycle of things with Odin to the Valkyries to the wolves and ravens on a battlefield and back around again.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's a question.
There's a few other resources that I would point you to. So I would point you to the Elder Edda. So the Elder Edda has a bit more of that in it, and that is where Odin is usually the actor. He's usually the one going to these wise halls and homes and asking questions, or like in the Voluspa where he goes to the wise woman to ask questions. And so in the Elder Edda, there is definitely some Odinic actions that aren't in the other ones. I would also turn you to things like Saga of the Volsungs, where he takes an active role in the Volsung family kind of throughout. So there are some points of literature where he shows up a bit more, and those are probably the two primary ones that I'm aware of.
I think the other one I find really interesting, I wish I knew more, it was Frigg, his wife. Because I mentioned last time, I read in something that she's silent, but she can prophesy. Not quite true, because in the Balder story, it's Frigg who's talking to everybody, right? Everybody protect Balder, and she's the one who tells Loki about the mistletoe, and he makes the dart. But interesting that Odin's wife, Odin who's pursuing knowledge and looking to the future and how to win at Ragnarok, his wife can prophesy. Huh.
Maybe that would be helpful.
Interesting. Maybe if she doesn't talk, that he didn't know.
Unfortunately, on that, I don't have a lot to offer because I just don't think there's a lot written about her, or really any of the goddesses. There's not a whole lot written. We owe a tremendous amount to Snorri Sturluson, because without Snorri, we really wouldn't have much of anything. I mean, the comparison I draw is, have you ever tried to look into Celtic mythology? We have almost nothing. Like, it is really hard to say anything definitive about Celtic mythology.
You said that about the Druids, like what we kind of think we know.
Yeah, we know almost nothing because there wasn't a work like this. There's hints and snatches, usually from people that were enemies of them. And so we just don't have what they thought, what they believed, and we don't have the stories. Now, some of the stories can bleed through in other forms and in, folklore and literature, but we just don't have what we have here from Snorri. So I am so grateful that he preserved what he preserved, but that's pretty much all we got. And so outside of that, I don't have a lot to offer in terms of characters that we would love to know more about, but just don't.
I think what we do know is super interesting, and it makes you want to know more, come up with your own stories. And certainly that's been done, more stories from these. But the other one, you mentioned the whale road, the kenning. There's so many kennings for the sea and the ocean. And I think a lot of them root back to the frost giants, because it doesn't seem like the Norse gods have a lot of order or control over the ocean, right? They needed the best of ships to cross it.
Yeah.
The ocean itself, I think, is this kind of unknown domain. I mean, that's where the serpent lives, right? There's not a lot of order or control put into place around the sea, which I just think is super cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's interesting that there are kennings related to people. They're near the end of my Skáldskaparmál, but men in particular are defined by stuff they had. things they carry, weapons or rings, their life they led, but there's nothing that's intrinsic to them. A lot of it is stuff from outside, almost custodians in nature. Like they're given these things for this short time, but that's how men are described. And for both men and women, there are specific trees that you can refer to them as. So I think men were ash or maple.
Okay.
And women, willow trees.
Really?
Yeah. And logs. Strangely, I think log had a different word, but they said also trees cut down are logs too.
I wonder if that has to do with that story of the creation when we had Ask and Embla and the idea that was driftwood that was found.
Sure.
So again, these connections to the stories.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just different ways. I mean, even Christ is referenced in here. Like, how are we to refer to Christ? And there are kennings about everything: the sun, the moon, the stars, the land, everything.
Well, and now forever when I look up in the sky, I will think about that guy's toe.
Yes.
And the eyes of the giant.
I like the Draco's eyes better.
Yeah, I like that one too. That was fun.
The Ussie's eyes.
And I still don't know which star is the toe. There are options. So I think I will end this by referring to something I said last week. Last week, I paraphrased a quote that I vaguely remember from C.S. Lewis about the pagans, because that's a natural question for a guy like me who's a pretty devout, pretty hardcore Christian about why do I care about these pagan works? Why am I interested in these? And I would say that there's several reasons. So one is they're just good stories, and good stories carry truth in them, whether they're pagan or Christian. And I think we can glean from that. I think there is a little bit that goes with that old concept of plundering the Egyptians. This is something that was first attributed, I think, to St. Augustine, where they were asking him about philosophy. You know, is it okay to use all this book learning from the pagans? And his response is, yeah, it's like when the Hebrews plundered the Egyptians, right? They took gold, they took things of value from this pagan land, but then it became their own. And so I think there's a little bit about that, or that's kind of the way I view pagan literature, is that there is truth and there is value in it that you can get out of it. The other thing, though, is the quote I was saying before, and we were able to find this in one of the essays of C.S. Lewis about why, in some ways, I'd rather read pagan than like full-on atheist stuff, because it says, "For a pagan, as history shows, is a man eminently convertible to Christianity." And with that, we'll turn the page, and we hope you join us for our next chapter.